Order, order. Mr Alistair Carmichael to move the motion.
Fuel poverty. Fuel poverty, Sir Roger, is defined as a household which commits more than 10% of its income on energy to maintain a satisfactory heating regime. It includes three elements. There is, of course, first of all, the household income for computing where that 10% actually lies. There is then the energy requirements of the household, so the quality of the housing stock, for example, and indeed the access to cheaper tariffs all bear an influence there. And then, of course, thirdly, there is the element of the fuel prices themselves. It is sobering to think that across the United Kingdom as a whole, there are no fewer than 6 million households living in fuel poverty. In Scotland in 2022, there were 791,000 households that were fuel poor. Yes, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I've recently received over 200 emails from pensioners in Glastonbury and Somerton who don't know if they can afford to turn on the heating this winter. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government should provide targeted energy discounts for vulnerable households to reduce the amount of people living in fuel poverty?
It'll be the first surprise of the day for everyone to hear, yes, we do. I very much agree with that. Or if not that, then something of this sort. Meaningful action that is going to be fit to meet the needs of the different parts of the United Kingdom really is long overdue. I've just given the House the numbers for fuel poverty. There is then the numbers for extreme fuel poverty, which is those households which are committing, instead of 10%, in something in excess of 20% of the household income to keeping their energy needs met and their homes warm. In Scotland, that was 311,000 in 2019, and by 2022, that figure had risen to 472,000. It's particularly acute for us in the Northern Isles. In Orkney and Shetland, 31% of households live in fuel poverty, and that's against a Scottish average, which is higher than the rest of the United Kingdom, of 24%. It's not difficult to see the reasons why it is particularly acute in the Northern Isles. We have winters that are longer, darker and colder than other parts of the country. We are off the gas grid. Most of our homes are heated using electricity, oil, sometimes LPG or solid fuel. Yes, we have an increasing number of people who are able to use photovoltaics or ground or air source heat pumps, but the bulk of our heating still comes from the conventional sources. Of course. Yeah.
For giving way and congratulate him on bringing this important debate. During a recent home visit to an elderly pensioner in my constituency, I sat with her in her freezing cold living room for over an hour while I was taking instructions on a matter. She was wearing 2 jumpers, a scarf, thick trousers and boots. And she was dressed in this way because she was too afraid to put the heating on because she didn't think she would have the money to pay the bill. And I wonder, does my right honourable friend member agree with me that the government's cruel cuts to the winter fuel allowance will have a serious impact on the health and well-being of some of our most vulnerable people?
I'm sad to say, actually, I do agree with that. And, you know, I've seen the same thing in houses across my own constituency, time after time after time. You see them, people sitting there with 2 or 3 or 4 layers on, with a blanket over their knees. If there's any heating, it'll maybe be a single barn, an electric fire, or something of that sort. And as far as the winter fuel payment's concerned, I'll touch on this again later. you have to understand that there's a generational difference here. The people who were getting that payment were people, for the large part, were brought up in an age where people didn't borrow, they lived within their means. So taking that money away puts them more acutely at risk than other people of other ages. And I think, when you're devising policy, you sometimes have to look at the social and psychological impact as much as the political and the economic. So yes, I think that is something to which I'll return, but I think she makes a good point there. And finally, of course, in communities such as mine, we have older, much less efficient, much less energy efficient housing stock. Now, looking at the budget last week, there were some elements within the budget that will have an impact here, or may perhaps mitigate the worst effects, rather. It didn't have the comprehensive strategy that I would have wanted to see, but in the interests of fairness, I think we should acknowledge that the increase in the minimum wage is something which, if it increases household incomes, will then have an impact on some of those people who are living in fuel poverty. The retention of the state pension triple lock, again, is something which is going to have that mitigation. So to that extent, these things are welcome, but actually when you put these into the context of the wider influences that take people into fuel poverty, you realise actually that they're hardly going to hit the sides as they go down. The energy price cap has now been taken up to £1,717, an increase of £150, and it seems likely that there is going to be a further increase come January. So in that way, again, you see that the situation amongst the fuel poor is something that is likely only to get worse. And that's where the Right Honourable Lady point about the winter fuel payments, I think, does really come in. It is true, as I anticipate the Minister will say, that there is the mechanism of pension credit for mitigating the worst effects of that. But we've known now for 20 years that there are problems with all the credits, all the tax credit schemes, and it is the variety of uptakes that you find across the board. And again, this is a generational thing. Coming from the community that he does, the Minister will know that there is still, amongst older people in parts of the country, a real stigma attached to the question of a means test. And for them, it is always then going to be less likely that they will want to apply for something that they could otherwise have been given as of right. So it feels like a position now where, for those who live in fuel poverty, anything that they are given by one hand is taken by the other. So what can we actually do? What tools do we have at our disposal at the moment? Well, we have the Warm Homes Discount and the Energy Company Obligation, the ECO scheme, and I will turn to them in a minute. But I have a couple of more specific issues to communities such as mine in relation to tackling fuel poverty. The Minister's heard me before. In fact, we met earlier this week to discuss the question of an Isles tariff. In Orkney and Shetland, we have been at the heart of supplying the nation's energy needs for the last 40 or 50 years, as we have played host to the oil and gas industry. Shetland now has one of the biggest onshore wind farm developments to be found anywhere in the country, but in the shadow of the turbines, you find some of the greatest, most acute problems of fuel poverty. And that is now generating a genuine sense of frustration that, as we play host to major energy developments, latterly renewables, there is very little or no community benefit for those who are hosting them to take advantage of. Now, on the question of an Isles tariff, and it doesn't need to be an Isles tariff, it could be something that might apply across the Highlands and Islands or other parts that are particularly badly affected. There does now need to be serious attention given to this. I'm pretty sure that Ofgem will not be keen on it, because Ofgem are never keen on anything that's actually going to make a difference, as far as I can see. But if they can accept the principle of differential treatment, if I can put it like that, through the idea of a social tariff, which is now the subject of a consultation, then you have to think that a geographic tariff would be something which should be given serious consideration. For many of my constituents relying on electric storage heating, the access to tariffs like total heating for with total control, something which was designed by the former Hydro Board, specifically with communities like mine in the Highlands and Islands in mind. That is, for many people, still the best, cheapest available source of heating for them. It doesn't, however, allow them to take advantage of the different tariffs when switching is available or something that saves them money. It requires 2 meters, one of which, in fact, has 2 readings. And as smart meters are rolled out, it appears that apparently smart meters might be smart, but they're not smart enough to do something that the old technology did quite easily. Then there is, of course, the question of the radio teleswitch. That is something which is actually the delivery mechanism for many of these tariffs. It is now due to be switched off in 2025 as the last of the BBC analogue signal is decommissioned. And I think we all have to have our fingers crossed that it lasts until 2025, because it could quite easily fall over at any point, and when it does, I think the string and chewing gum that's keeping it going at the moment will simply no longer be enough. So can the Minister give me an update on this? I know that his predecessor had actually agreed with me before the election to hold a roundtable event. The election intervened, but I'm pleased to hear that the roundtable actually went ahead and the different players were brought together in the room, and that appears to have made some progress, but the detail of that progress would be something which my constituents would be keen to hear. The government, in their manifesto, promised a strategy which would have a Warm Homes plan, to which £13.2 billion would be committed in order to address fuel poverty. The budget last year allocated £3.4 billion over 3 years. So £3.4 billion, a sizable chunk of money, but it's not the 13.2 that we were promised. So presumably the remaining £9.8 billion will have to come in years 4 and 5 of this Parliament if the commitment is to be made. I have 2 problems with this. First of all, it's going to leave a lot of people in fuel poverty for another 3 years while we're waiting for the money to come. More likely, though, if it does come at all, then we will be shoveling money into wheelbarrows to get it out over the 2 years, and that always brings with it the law of unintended consequences. We've seen it time and time again with energy efficiency measures, renewable energy development, all these sort of things, that you have money, it has to be spent within a target, but you haven't already got the existing labour force, you haven't got the skills base to deliver the work, so you get a whole load of fly-by-night companies that set up, they come in to our communities from the outside, they do work which is substandard, they go away, they eventually go bankrupt, and the constituents are left having to pick up the pieces. So it is obviously for the Treasury to decide how that money is going to be spent, but can the Minister give me some assurance that looking towards years 3, 4 and 5 of this government, there is a view to having a strategy that is going to use the money that's currently committed and will have a clear idea and can start planning now how to use any money that is to come in the future. Finally, Sir Roger, there are the 2 existing vehicles that we have for alleviating fuel poverty. We have the Warm Homes discount and the energy company obligation. The Warm Homes discount reduces bills by £150 a year. for those who qualify, and likewise ECO assists people with energy efficiency adaptations, renewable energy adaptations, etc. But they're both means-tested again. So we're still back to this question of cliff edges. And most concerning of all, these are measures that are due to end in 2026 unless they are renewed by the government. So it will be an easier conversation to be had with Treasury for the Minister if he bears in mind that actually these are schemes where the funding does not come from Treasury but from the energy companies. We do, however, need to know that there is a plan for the continuation of these schemes or something that is going to seek to achieve the same end. If that plan were to come as part of a green paper or a white paper which would outline the strategy which there was, which is the thing that is lacking here at the moment. We've got a scheme here, a scheme there, an idea of this, an idea of that, but there's no overall overarching strategy that would ensure that the best possible delivery could have been taken in order to ensure that the stats that we gave at the beginning of this debate, 6 million homes across the whole of the United Kingdom living in fuel poverty, should not be something that we are prepared to live with.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Roger. And I'd like to congratulate the member for Orkney and Shetland for securing this important debate on fuel poverty. I'd like to highlight really the impact in particular of poor quality housing on fuel poverty. This is something that I'm particularly acutely aware of in my constituency of Shipley. We do have some really poor quality housing. It's very typical for a northern town, northern city, that we do have a higher proportion of non-decent homes, which means that they just don't meet the standards for a warm and dry home. And that obviously has knock-on effects for people's health and for their well-being. The other thing we know, and from my own work, is that older people are also more likely to live in these non-decent homes, and that can also have quite significant impacts. So there's data that's been shared with me from Friends of the Earth that shows there are 17 energy crisis hotspots in Shipley alone. These are neighbourhoods that are identified that have below average household income but above average energy bills. So we need to use these sorts of data to really focus our efforts around tackling fuel poverty, and also, the excellent work that the government's doing to invest in home insulation to really make sure we target it at these energy hotspots. I'm very proud as well that the government's looking to invest in new homes, but it's really critical that those are also warm homes and energy efficient homes, so that we, with new social housing, can reduce the incidence of fuel poverty in the future. I was pleased to see in Liverpool, the city region there, are working with Octopus Energy and with home manufacturers to create effectively homes that are going to be guaranteed as having zero bills for at least 10 years. And they're going to be able to do that at scale because of these new methods of manufacturing. So some really huge opportunities as the government embarks on the sort of housing programme to actually address fuel poverty as well as through home insulation. Clearly, there are links between fuel poverty and pensioner poverty. The two do go hand in hand. And really, I think it's a scandal that, under the watch of the past Conservative government, that the number of pension credit claimants actually halved between 2010 and 2024, from 2.6 million to just 1.35 million. And sadly, over that same period, we saw pensioner poverty rise from 12%, that's 1.2 million people, to 16%, 2.1 million people. A real scandal. So I obviously agree that we should be targeting the winter fuel support on the poorest pensioners. But we also need to be doing all we can to make sure that those who are eligible for pension credit and thereby winter fuel allowance are brought on to pensioner credit. So I think the DWP estimated that almost 900,000 eligible households were not claiming this benefit. And again, it's fantastic that other colleagues in government are working to raise awareness of pension credit amongst some of our poorest pensioners and making sure that support is available. I want to pay particular tribute, Chair, if I may, to some of the local organisations in my constituency who are supporting those pensioners who experience fuel poverty, like Age UK Bradford, Citizens Advice Bradford, as well as some of the housing associations and Bradford Council, who are providing both advice and direct support to address fuel poverty. And making sure that people have the right advice and the right benefits. Thank you. So I would hope that the government will continue to make efforts to ensure that these poorest pensioners do receive the support available to them. I'd just like to make a couple of final points, if I may, Chair, before concluding. Obviously, not everyone in fuel poverty is a pensioner. Not everyone who is a pensioner is in fuel poverty. And so I think it's really important. I'm glad that the Honourable Member has had this broader debate on fuel poverty to really recognise that it isn't just something that affects older people, that it can affect families of all ages. And obviously the budget has done a lot to raise people out of poverty by raising the national living wage. But we've also got to target bills. You know, for many families, if they have somebody with a disability, particularly if they are caring, they can experience much higher energy use and thereby energy bills. And so in particular to help families where they do have people with disability or chronic conditions, it is really important that we are doing everything through GB Energy, investing in clean energy to get down bills. So in summary, Chair, I think it's really welcome that we're having this debate about fuel poverty. We must recognise that it needs a comprehensive approach, looking at housing, looking at lifting people out of poverty, as well as getting the bills down. And so I hope in his concluding remarks the Minister will outline how these actions together will reduce fuel poverty for people of all ages. Thank you, Chair.
Danny Chambers.
Apologies. Thank you, Sir Roger, for calling me to speak and pay tribute to my friend from Orkney and Shetland for securing this debate at this very critical time as we head into winter. I spoke last week at the NHS debate about winter preparedness. So we know that our A&E departments, our doctors and other health services are particularly busy in winter. And it's worth noting that people living in fuel poverty end up contributing to this, because if you're elderly or otherwise vulnerable or ill and you can't afford to turn on your heating, then you're more likely to get complications, you're more likely to get sick, obviously with flu and COVID, but you're more likely to end up being admitted to hospital of hypothermia. And it costs the NHS about £1.4 billion every year dealing with the consequences of people living in cold or damp of homes. So I think it's worth noting that it's not just the impact on the individual's finances, but it's actually the impact on the resources of the health services that fuel poverty ends up having.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Would my right honourable friend agree that it's not just the NHS, but for example in Harpenden and Berkhamsted, and I'm sure across the country, so many local charities and also even my local district and county authorities are looking at how they can support those who are finding it hard, but also those who are falling off a cliff edge after the winter fuel allowance has been scrapped, but that it's actually, there are charities and councils who are also picking up the slack of not dealing with fuel poverty properly.
That's a very good point, and certainly in Winchester, the Winchester Citizens Advice have told me that they spend a huge proportion of their time dealing with people who've, at the moment, specifically got energy bill issues. So it's something that all variety of organisations are being drawn into. The member for Shipley touched on housing and quality of housing. And yes, it's worth sort of noting that in the UK, we've got the oldest housing stock in Europe. 38% of houses in the UK were built before the 1940s. And just to compare that, it's about 11% in Spain. And so these houses obviously weren't designed with particularly high energy standards. And one thing that Liberal Democrats were calling for during the general election was an emergency sort of home energy upgrade programme for people who are living in poverty in social housing and people who can't afford bills. Because retrofitting, insulation, people who are struggling, it's not only good for those individuals, it's not only good for the NHS, but it's also good for the environment as well. And so it's something we'd really urge the government to double down on, is looking at how we can improve and retrofit the quality of our old housing. And then linked directly to that is the building standards that were reduced under the last government about energy efficiency. New builds should be net zero, they should be hugely energy efficient. There's no excuse for any house being built going forward to have occupants living in fuel poverty, and we should do absolutely everything we can do to make sure that doesn't happen. And finally, I'll just, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and I represent a large area of the Meon Valley, which is very rural. And as my honourable friend from Orkney's pointed out, that many rural villages and farms and houses are reliant on either solid fuel heating, that they're not on the gas grid, they have to have electrical storage heaters. That is hugely expensive. And we also know that rural areas have a slightly higher proportion of elderly people as well. And so I've had a huge amount of correspondence from people living in rural areas and people who are elderly, who are particularly worried about this winter coming up. And I heard from someone called Julia. She says she has osteoarthritis and osteopenia. She has to walk with crutches. And she's currently on a waiting list to try and to be transferred to more affordable accommodation. And she said she often has to skip meals to make ends meet. She dreads turning on the heating because of the cost. And with poor circulation, she frequently loses the feeling of her feet from the cold. And although I acknowledge what the member Shipley said, not all elderly people rely on the winter fuel allowance to heat their homes. We know that's certainly not the case. But the way this has been brought in so quickly, right before winter, there are a lot of elderly people who are not expecting this, who will be plunged into crisis. And Julie has emailed me with a clear ask to the Minister, saying, is there a commitment from the government, if they are removing the winter fuel payments, could they consider expanding qualifying benefits to include housing benefit, council tax support, disability benefits, attendance allowance, because this would be a lifeline for her and many others who are facing similar hardships. Thank you.
First of all, say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairship, and can I thank the honourable gentleman for Orkney and Shetland for having this debate today. By having this debate, he's given us all an opportunity to participate, and we thank him greatly for that. I suppose, if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't think the honourable gentleman has ever had a debate that I haven't come along to, because he brings forward the issues that I'm very interested in, and I thank him for that. Okay. And I want to give an Northern Ireland perspective, Sir Roger, if I can. It will illustrate exactly what the issues are. Others have said it, and I'm quite sure that those who follow will back up the occurring theme. Fuel poverty in Northern Ireland is certainly grim reading. I read the Fuel Poverty Alliance report, which highlighted that comparable statistics would show that fuel poverty levels throughout the United Kingdom are as follows. Northern Ireland was some 21.5%, England was 10.4%. You might be pretty lucky to live in England. I think a lot of people who are on fuel poverty in England won't tell you that. And Scotland is 26.5% and Wales is 23%. However, whenever you look at those stats and you try to figure out exactly what does it mean, a recent look at the Northern Ireland Housing Executive Report indicates that when taking into account household base of 21 degrees heating and living, then the figure for Northern Ireland is closer to 30%. In other words, it's the highest in the United Kingdom, it gives me no pleasure whatsoever, Sir Roger, to have to say that. But it gives an idea of where the problems are. I should have said, and apologies for not doing it, it's nice to see the Minister in this place. I look forward to his response. And ever my friend, the Shadow Minister, and I look forward to his contribution as well. The fact is that people have gotten used, and I use this terminology, have gotten used to dressing for outside when they're living in their house. Just Donovan Gentleman illustrated that incredibly well in his introduction. But that's a fact for the people. And the Honourable Lady, who's not here now, she gave the illustration as well of a constituent that she'd visit, and she was wrapped up like almost like a teddy bear in relation to all the clothes that she had on. But the fact was, if she didn't have those clothes on, that lady would have been probably pretty close to hypothermia. Very happy, yes, of course.
On that, I think we all have those stories, and I'm always heartbroken when they come in. But I've had one constituent say to me, I live alone on my pension, and will either have to stay in bed all day or keep a coat on and hot water bottle if I can afford the electric to keep keep boiling the kettle. It's a very sad state of affairs, isn't it?
Thank the Honourable Lady for that, yeah, and the Honourable Lady illustrates a point that the Honourable Lady rightly says is replicated regularly amongst my constituents, amongst all constituents, and today this debate's about them. That's why we're here, to make the point, Sir Roger, on behalf of our constituents who are in these predicaments and under incredible pressure. I did a quick survey in my own office. One staff member had her heating temperature set at 21 degrees. The rest were less, as they just take the chill off and sit on their blankets. Fuel poverty may affect more people than maybe people, maybe the Minister or the Shadow Minister or anyone really understands. The staff member who did so said she had children, has to prioritise heat, and you'd understand that if you have children, you want to keep them warm in the house. Her gas top-up statement, and here's some stats and figures. They're quite stark. Her gas top-up statement showed that the last November she topped it up at 294. The same in December and the same in January. February was down to 245. So for her in that 4-month period, it was £1,127 for a 4-month period. And you add that over years, £3,500–4,000 for your energy, just to keep your house warm. Now, thank the Lord for summer and the heat that sometimes it brings, maybe not as much as we wish, but nonetheless it brings heat, and you can have less of your gas on. But it does illustrate the problem. For those months, the staff member referred, who isn't in the house from 8:30 until 5:30, was in fuel poverty. And she's well paid, by the way. I say that, but the point I'm making is many people find themselves in a predicament when it comes to this issue. How much more so for our pensioners who are not out of the house and warm in their workplace, or for the stay-at-home parents, or for our disabled. All those people who have different pressures. I often think, Sir Roger, when you illustrate something with an example, there are so many other examples of those who perhaps, with different circumstances, are equally under the same pressures. We have told people for years to get rid of the fire and get a cleaner heater of oil or gas. Now people can't afford to turn it up, and this is all before we take in the crushing blow of the removal of winter fuel allowance, which affects millions in the UK, but particularly my constituents in Northern Ireland, who are reliant so much on oil as their method of heating. I'm very happy to, yes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to see whether the Honourable Gentleman would agree with me that part of the solution to this is building more higher quality housing for older people. So many of our communities, people are living in unsuitable cold damp homes, but they don't have affordable alternatives to move to within their own communities. So I wondered if the Honourable Gentleman agreed with me that part of the solution to this is seeing more high quality but affordable older people's housing to give people like those that he was describing opportunities to move into much better insulated homes, easier to heat.
For that, and none of it is right. I mean, others have illustrated the issue of house building. We live in older houses, it's a fact. Government has committed themselves to, I think, 1.5 million new homes in this term. I wish them well on that, by the way. I want to see that happening. But we can only hope that those homes will be energy efficient. I chair the APPG on healthy homes and buildings, so one of the things that we're pushing for is to ensure that whatever new homes come through, that they will be energy efficient, that they will enable people with disabilities or vulnerable people or elderly people to be able to have a quality of life in a home. But we also have to look at within that is the upgrading of the older homes that don't have all the things that the Honourable Lady very rightly asked for, and which we try to bring forward as well. In Northern Ireland, by way of comparison, in the latest census, the figures indicated that 62% of households in Northern Ireland have oil. So therefore, the impact of oil, every time you have a war, you nearly, you become incredibly worried because you say oil prices are going up, and therefore your central heating oil will increase that. That affects 62% of households in Northern Ireland every time it happens. Now, oil's down a wee bit now, and it's good to have it down, but it's still an incredibly expensive way of heating your home. They entirely depend on oil for many houses in Northern Ireland, whereas the percentage for England and Wales was just 4%. Again, an illustration perhaps of the pressures that we have in Northern Ireland as against others. For Northern Irish consumers, this can be expensive and inconvenient, but it's also having high associated carbon emissions. Though the use of gas has expanded since 2011 to around 200,000 households, it is still firmly behind oil in usage, and this has led to higher levels of fuel poverty as well. Northern Ireland is currently preparing an energy strategy. I know the Minister is very, very diligent, and I say that honestly to him. I think he may have had the opportunity to have some discussions with his compatriots in Northern Ireland. I'd be interested, just for the conversation and the debate we're having, if that has happened and what the outcome has been, please, if you don't mind. It's due for release in 2025, so it's the skeletal story of what that energy strategy will be is probably already there, although it hasn't been released just yet. The aim is, and I quote, is alleviating fuel poverty will have a positive impact on both mental, and the Honourable Gentleman referred to that earlier on, and physical health, especially for more vulnerable populations. In addition, making our homes more sustainable and easier to heat, as the Honourable Lady has said, will help fight climate change, because the issue of climate change can't be ignored either. It's all part of this strategy that we all try to bring, the government tries to bring together, and will lead to a more just transition. Aspirations, my goodness, we all have aspirations, but along with aspirations we need actual physical help to make that happen. So that would be one of the honourable member referred to attendance allowance forms in his comment. And I know when I was on the election trail back in July and knocking the doors, as I do, and I'm of a certain age now, but I resonate with those who are on the doors, who are pensioners, and I recognise that there are things that we can do to help. One of the things that the honourable member referred to was the attendance allowance forms. On my time in the doors, I managed to get about just slightly over 80 of those applicants to be filled in. They take an hour and a bit to do. It takes us quite a time to get them cleared up, but it does help for those who have had their winter fuel allowance removed, and if they are pensioners and they have disabilities and they're on medication, then it's quite possible, as the Honourable Gentleman says, they will qualify for that attendance allowance. It's just a thought. Again, a more positive reaction, if you don't mind me saying so, from government to address those things and let people know their rights and all, I think is something that we should be doing as well. The fact is that words on paper that have no impact on the pensioner who didn't know they could save more of their pension to get the oil this year, as they expected to, have help with their relied on winter fuel allowance. So I would suggest maybe, and I know that the Minister is responsible, the DWP isn't that, but there is, I believe, an onus upon government to introduce that option to as many pensioners as will qualify. The pensioners I know had no time to prepare and save their pennies, and the outcome will be an uplift in cold-related illness and perhaps even cold-related death. I conclude with this, Mr Chairman. I realise I've gone a wee bit longer than I thought. I seriously urge government to do the right thing, even at this stage, and reinstate this much-needed help to pensioners in the country. When we discuss fuel poverty in this place, but then for government to take help for warmth from him. I don't know about anyone else. It certainly leaves me a lot colder, a lot poorer in spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I want to begin by thanking my right honourable friend, the member for Orkney and Shetland, for securing this very, very important debate. And I'm also very pleased that both the Minister and the Shadow Minister are here to listen to this debate this afternoon. My colleagues are exactly right. Tackling fuel poverty needs to be a priority for the government. Progress has stalled under the Conservatives, with no notable decrease in the percentage of households in fuel poverty since 2019. The situation in this country is pretty dire, and we do need action now. UK homes are among the least energy efficient in Europe, making fuel poverty worse given the cost of heating. With a Resolution Foundation study noting that the UK housing stock offers the worst value for money of any advanced economy. I was particularly shocked to read, like my honourable friend for Winchester, that British housing is the oldest in Europe, with 38% of homes built before 1946. This is particularly noteworthy given that 4 years prior to that, in 1942, Sir William Beveridge, Liberal economist, politician and true father of the NHS, published his report uncovering the 5 great evils which plagued British society. One of the great evils in his report was squalor. He was shocked by the conditions of housing and the link to ill health and the discomfort it brought to inhabitants. And yet, more than 81 years later, he must be rolling in his grave. We still find ourselves failing to do the basic duty of a welfare state and are unable to protect the most vulnerable in our society. This has a tangible impact on people's lives. And as again, my honourable friend for Winchester said, NHS spending is an estimated 1.4 billion annually on treating illnesses associated with cold and damp housing. When wider societal costs are considered, such as healthcare, that figure rises to 15.4 billion. With this information in mind, I'm perplexed as to why the government would axe the winter fuel payment and to allow the greater evil of squalor to grow deeper into our communities. In my constituency of Wokingham, vulnerable pensioners continue to raise their concerns with me that they are not being considered by this government. Age UK's data shows that the vast majority of older people in poverty, or those just £55 a week above the poverty line, will not be protected from the cuts to the winter fuel payment. We need to ensure that they are protected, especially at a time when energy bills are set to rise yet again this winter. With 16,577 pensioners in Wokingham expected to be affected, I want to yet again make clear my complete and total opposition to the cut in winter fuel payments. That's why I voted against the government's decision to scrap them, and why I have raised in the Chamber alternative means by which the government could have paid for reversing these cuts without any additional burden on the Exchequer. But despite the overwhelming opposition from all over the country, they clearly are going to press ahead with their cuts. Therefore, I want to join my Lib Dem colleagues and call upon the Minister to set out how they intend to support households in cutting their energy bills, and especially how they will ensure pensioners are protected from fuel poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger, for allowing me to contribute to the debate, and thank you very much, the Right Honourable Friend for Orkney and Shetland. I would say of the two big issues facing rural Scotland, or the Highlands in particular, one is the care sector, and the second thing is fuel poverty. I'm sure you haven't spent too much time worrying about this, but the mean average daily temperature in London is 16 degrees, and it is 9 degrees on the island of Skye, where God comes from. On Skye, on Skye we have longer nights, colder weather, windier conditions, older and draftier houses. In June this year, the daily standing charge for electricity was 61.1p in the north of Scotland, and in London it was 40.8p. So in the north of Scotland, we're paying 50% more to be connected to our electricity than we are down here. So that's quite a shocking thing.
Would my honourable friend allow?
Yes, thank you.
Scandal of variable standing charges, and it goes massively and randomly across the whole country. I think the worst is actually North Wales, from memory, is one thing. OVO Energy, just a couple of weeks ago, announced that they would now start charging their customers £1.50 every time they send them a paper bill. Is that not just taking what, for the purposes of staying on the right side of Sir Roger, we will call taking the mick at the moment?
Thank you very much. What is absolutely clear is that people who are not losing money at the electricity companies, if you add up their total profits, it is tens of billions, but it is being borne by the poorest people of our society.
Will the honourable gentleman join me, therefore, in congratulating the Chancellor on having introduced and increased the windfall tax on gas and oil companies, recognising those excess profits that they are making and taking that money to invest it in some of the priorities that we've been talking about, such as home insulation? Thank you.
That also is Liberal Democratic policy, so I'm pleased to support that. Interestingly, in these standing charges, because I know you'll find it interesting, France, Italy, Ireland, etc., we do all have an equalisation of standing charges. Standing charges and Ofgem's reluctance to it has been raised many times in Westminster Hall and throughout the Commons. So it is something which we need to get proper answers to. 3 or 4 more things about this. Town gas is basically by far the most affordable way of heating your house. And 60% of houses in the Highlands do not have access to town gas. So, as my right honourable friend was saying, that kerosene, bottled gas, electricity, wood coal are very much more expensive. And the people in the Highlands have no option apart from getting it. Stopping the winter fuel allowance, it is easy for us to have a go at this one. I don't understand why the figure was set at, say, £13,000. Instead, it could have been set at, say, the average household income of below £34,000. Yeah. And that would have been a huge relief to many people who were most impacted and probably been much more popular for the government at the moment. In the Highlands, we have a much lower income than Scotland or indeed Britain as a whole. We have a much older population. The cost of living is between 15 and 30% higher than it is in the rest of Scotland, according to the Scottish Affairs Committee in 2021. We have a substantial depopulation problem, and we have, as I said, the highest cost of living across the UK, of which fuel is a major contributor. I know the Energy Minister has heard this from me before, but community benefits from renewables are potentially the biggest saving grace from this, because my number one call is for fuel vouchers to be given to locals who are affected. And of course, in the Highlands, we have lots of renewables, and that would make a very big difference. The second thing which you could do is get Ofgem to review the standing charges, which, if it was equalised, would, I estimate, be about a 75% at no cost to the Treasury. Sorry, £75 a year at no cost to the Treasury. And then the third thing is to concentrate the winter fuel allowance on the most deserving people, who tend to be the older, the poorer, and the more remote. Thank you.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this important debate and for raising the particular issue of geography and the urgent need to support people living in extreme weather, as backed up by the honourable member for Strangford, who is, of course, here, as he is in every debate in the Westminster Hall, and for my honourable friend from Inverness, Skye and West Rossshire. But I would just like to say that those of us who live in the south can be similarly affected, where many of the homes have solid walls and thatched roofs, which are incredibly difficult to insulate or upgrade. But I do accept that it is slightly warmer down south. It is shameful that in a modern society many families are being forced to choose between heating and eating, and we're seeing food banks not only handing out food parcels but hot water bottles for people to stay warm. And in Dorset, the Help for Warmth scheme, alongside some of the major energy suppliers, is now providing households with air fryers to help them reduce their energy costs this winter. Liberal Democrats welcome the extension of the Household Support Fund and the added flexibility that is being given to allow councils and their delivery partners, like Citizens Advice, to use some of the funding to address the causes of poverty. Because whilst welcome, giving households a payment to simply pay the bill is putting a sticking plaster over the problem, which is, of course, the rising energy costs in the first place. For the sake of people's health and well-being, for their financial stability and for the future of our planet, we need to move to a position where we reduce demand. As mentioned by my colleagues, the UK's homes are among the worst insulated in Europe, which is why the Liberal Democrats have focused for so long on upgrading the homes that we have and building low-energy homes for the future. So it is disappointing that during the GB Energy Bill, the government rejected the amendment from my honourable friend from South Cambridgeshire that would have ensured the new body facilitates a home insulation programme. And following on from our general election manifesto commitment for an emergency programme which would provide free retrofits for all low-income households, as flagged by my honourable friend for Winchester. It's also shocking that new homes are still being built without basic low-energy measures, and I welcome my honourable friend from Cheltenham's Sunshine Bill, which we hope will see solar PV installed as standard on new homes. Residents in my constituency of Mid Dorset and North Poole have written to me completely bemused that they are expected to welcome vast solar farms on what they see as open farmland, when the rooftops in Wimborne and Merley are not being covered in solar panels. Yeah. And when the government said they would unleash a solar rooftop revolution, we need to see this happen, because analysis from Solar Together has showed a drop in the uptake. The claim that such measures would add significant cost to house building, which we know under the previous government the developers were saying, are really spurious. When I served on the Local Government Association's EEHT board, we spent many hours collating the views of councils everywhere. And I want to pay tribute to the former leader of Barking and Dagenham Council, who chaired that board. He made the case very eloquently that if councils were funded to cover the rooftops of social housing and public building with solar PV, we could transform the sector. The scale of the investment would enable colleges to deliver the courses in green skills, and the supply chain would be developed, reducing the cost further for homeowners to invest in their own properties, making it not the preserve of the wealthy. And as Lib Dems, we would balance this with policy that would allow homeowners to offset spending on insulation, low-carbon heat sources, EV charging points and climate adaptation measures against income tax bills. And we already know some providers of green mortgages are providing beneficial terms for those such investments. Fuel poverty is a trap. Once households are stuck in a place where they are simply feeding the meter to stay warm, they cannot look beyond to plan for the future. So we need social tariffs for those who are struggling, and we need the government's response to the consultation on the standing charges to progress more quickly. It's reassuring to know Ofgem are looking at it, but I would like to ask the Minister to provide an urgent timeline for this. In terms of the social tariffs referred to my honourable friends, it is worrying that the reliance at the moment is on the warm homes discount. When I visited the staff at my local Citizens Advice in Wareham, they consider that the warm homes discount needs total reform, including a requirement for all energy companies to be included in the programme. And it does feel rather ironic that our local water company, Wessex Water, does offer a social tariff, but the energy companies don't. Whilst talking about supply, I couldn't miss the opportunity to remind the Chamber, Sir Roger, that the Liberal Democrats believe that the windfall tax must go further. The super profits of oil and gas producers and traders should be helping to fund not just the renewable sector, but the upgrade of homes so that no one has to use as much energy to heat their homes. And I couldn't wind up without referencing the winter fuel allowance, as every member has so far. My team have checked that we've had close to 500 residents in Mid Dorset and North Poole who have written to me about this. Colette from Poole told me, "I can't afford to get cold. I have 3 lung diseases. I will likely die, as the NHS is crumbling under the strain and others will be taking up the beds." Glynis from Corfmullen, like the constituent referred to from my honourable friend from Harpenden, said that she would stay in bed longer, and Stephen from Wimborne said he would have to hug his dog to keep warm. I am glad that honourable members referred to the council's role in this. Every time I visit a library or community centre, they tell me about how these places are now being used by people relying on them to stay warm. And I've heard my bus company concerned about people riding the bus all day to avoid putting the heating on at home. But buses aren't running in so many places because rural areas don't have them, and more councils are having to close their libraries. So what happens then? And one other thing which I don't think anyone's mentioned is the risk of fire. The Strategic Assessment for Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service has even listed fuel poverty as a risk. They state there has been a rise in alternative heating methods, increasing the risk of fire in homes. In conclusion, Liberal Democrats believe that people in fuel poverty need support now. They cannot wait for 3 more winters, as indicated by my honourable friend. The most effective way to end fuel poverty is to invest substantially in renewable technologies and to give councils and communities the power to develop community energy schemes, including delivering housing efficiency measures street by street. I look forward to a commitment to some of these measures from the Minister.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon and to join with so many colleagues here in Westminster Hall for what is an incredibly important debate, in which I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Orkney and Shetland, for bringing here this afternoon. It's been great to hear from colleagues from Orkney and Shetland, from Shipley, speaking about the removal of the winter fuel allowance, but the push to get more pensioners onto pension credit, that of course is incredibly important. However, when the figure suggests that the push for pension credit will actually offset the money being saved by the apparent removal of winter fuel allowance, I do wonder whether or not the Treasury has, and DWP have actually thought their plans through. The comments from the Honourable Member for Winchester about the knock-on impact on the services such as the NHS and the charities of fuel poverty was well made, and I think should have been listened to carefully by all in this room and beyond. As ever, my honourable friend, the member, and he's a friend for Strangford, made some powerful points about the unique situation facing residents in Northern Ireland, where so many more houses than in Great Britain are off-grid and rely on LPG and oil for their heating, and unique challenges facing those households over there when combating fuel poverty, and the crushing blow, in his words, of the removal of the winter fuel allowance for those pensioners looking to a cold winter this year. The Honourable Member for Wokingham raised insulation. I completely get his point. We need to go further and need to move faster to insulate more homes. But the last government, the Conservative government's record on this is one of which I'm actually quite proud. We inherited a situation where only 12% of households had insulation EPC rating C or above when we left office just earlier this year. That was up to 41%. That's a near 30% increase. Could we have gone further? Absolutely. Can we do more? We absolutely should. But that was a near 30% increase on the situation which we found ourselves when we came into office, and that's something on which I am very proud. I'm always delighted to give way to my right honourable friend.
On the subject of EPC, is that not something else we could reform? Because the way in which EPC bandings are rated seems to me to be utterly random and occasionally quite counterproductive.
Yes, I agree with the right honourable gentleman. I would love to see the government commit to a review of EPC ratings and how homes are judged. And maybe the Minister might want to speak to that if there are any plans coming through DESNES or indeed the other departments who would be responsible for that as well. The Honourable Member for Inverness, Skye and West Rossshire. it's taking some time to get used to that constituency name, raised some very interesting points, and of course concerns which I share, representing a vast rural constituency myself. He's entirely wrong, however. God, of course, comes from Aberdeenshire and not the Isle of Skye, although it's probably a close second if he was to choose between the two. I do, however, and this is a point also raised by the Liberal Democrat spokeswoman, I do wonder what his constituents, and indeed constituents of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Orkney and Shetland, and companies reliant on the energy sector, the oil and gas sector, think of the Liberal Democrat support for the extension of the energy profits levy. But as we will be voting on the budget resolutions in just a few hours' time, maybe they may go away and reconsider their support for those measures brought forward by the government. We certainly will be voting against any extension this evening. Keeping homes warm this winter will be at the forefront of mind for many households across the United Kingdom right now. We can feel the temperature falling outside as we speak, and as a consequence of various pressures such as Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing instability in the Middle East, the cost of heating homes has risen and hit many families hard. A myriad of factors contributes to fuel poverty, from energy efficiency, income, housing costs, and of course energy prices. That's why the previous Conservative government took steps to support families to keep their homes warm. Through the Energy Bill Support Scheme and the Energy Price Guarantee, we supported households the length and breadth of the UK at the height of the energy crisis. The steps we took amounted to around £1,500 for your typical household, covering around half of every home in Britain's energy bill. The Warm Home Discount Scheme saw support for 3 million households that are at risk of fuel poverty. That's 3 million families who could afford to keep warm and keep more of their money in their pockets. We stepped up support for our pensioners, delivering up to £600 in winter fuel payments and pensioner cost of living payments to 11.8 million pensioners. 1.1 cold weather payments worth £29.6 million were paid out last winter alone. All steps to support some of the most vulnerable people in our society from cold weather. I'd be delighted.
Thank you. So, despite all of these measures that he says that the previous government made, how is it that the Lancet, the Institute for Health Equity, estimated there were 102 excess winter deaths in the Shipley constituency alone due to cold homes? It seems to me that these are shocking figures, and actually none of the things that the last government did actually did anything to reduce fuel poverty or deaths from cold homes.
I think one death through fuel poverty or living in a cold home is one too many, not least the number that she said in her own constituency. And of course we all must look at what more we can do to ensure that homes are better insulated, and indeed that pensioners have the ability, and indeed other vulnerable people in society have the ability to keep their homes warm through the winter. But I am proud that over the energy crisis last year we did see the government step up and pay half of everybody in this country's energy bill. That is something which I think was important that we did, and indeed through all the other measures that we brought forward, supporting so many people in this country. Could be, as I said, could we do more? One person living in fuel poverty is one too many, but it is important that we recognise that this government, the previous government, did take steps to ensure that fuel poverty was addressed and that people could keep warm last winter. So I have no doubt that members from all sides will have heard from elderly constituents and their families at how worried they are that for many of them, the winter fuel payment that I was speaking of just there is being taken away from them. For those pensioners in my constituency, and indeed others represented here today, vast rural northern constituencies, this is particularly alarming. They will understand what it is to live in parts of rural Britain during winter. As I have mentioned on the floor of the House before, Braemar, in my constituency of West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, holds the coldest UK temperature record of -27 degrees, although I do believe that's actually shared with Altnahara in the Honourable Member for Caithness, Solent East and Ross's constituency. But it is often these rural communities that face the coldest temperatures more frequently that this support is so needed. That's why it is so regrettable that the new government made the political decision not only to take that critical funding away from those vulnerable pensioners, but to do so at the same time as they found an extra £11 billion from somewhere to hand out inflation-busting pay rises to public sector workers. A political decision that Age UK have said will leave millions of struggling pensioners without the money that they rely on, leaving them without the lifeline that they so badly need, many of them being left in serious trouble. In February this year, fuel poverty was estimated to fall over 2024. In choosing this path, the Labour government risked reversing that, pushing more vulnerable households into choosing between heating and eating. I never thought I would stand and see a Labour government taking such a decision. Prior to today's debate, I had a look over the Labour Party's manifesto, something government ministers must have failed to do, seeing as they keep breaking the promises that were in it. Interestingly, in that manifesto is a quote from a pensioner called Gary. He talks about the challenges with keeping on top of his energy bills and how apparently only Labour has a plan to help him. I do wonder how Gary now feels knowing that this Labour government has taken away the support that pensioners like him are relying on. Gary also talks about GB Energy in the manifesto, and we've heard a lot about this government and the Labour Party about how GB Energy will reduce bills by £300. We don't hear talk about that much anymore. Now, politics aside, we all in this debate, in this building, across all parties and across all parts of this United Kingdom, represented quite well here in this room, want to see fuel poverty eradicated. And having visited the wind farm that my right honourable gentleman speaks about on Shetland, and also representing a rural constituency which too hosts a number of wind farms and associated energy infrastructure, and in which too sees too much fuel poverty, both being incredibly rural and with many relying on oil and LPG to heat their homes, who are far more exposed to wildly fluctuating prices. I do understand the challenges, and I do understand why we must get a grip of this. 6 million people living in fuel poverty is far too many. One living in fuel poverty is too many. And as I said, politics aside, despite what I've said leading up to this, I want to assure the honourable gentleman, the Minister, the right honourable gentleman who brought forward the debate, honourable members, and indeed all, that we, in His Majesty's opposition, will work as constructively as we can in finding solutions and finding a way forward to tackle fuel poverty in this country and ensure that nobody moving forward has to choose between heating and eating.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and can I thank all honourable and right honourable members for participating in this debate today, in particular the honourable member for Orkney and Shetland for securing this debate and for his commitment on this issue in a number of debates across many, many years. I know that in his constituency, well, he said earlier on 31%, I think. I know this is a considerable issue in his constituency, and he's right to raise it in this House, and I always appreciate conversations with him on this topic, including recently on many of the topics that we've heard today. And I share the importance of this debate on tackling fuel poverty today, though I do want to just start at the outset by saying that fuel poverty, of course, has devolved across the UK. So there are certain things I'll speak about today that relate to the UK government's responsibility for fuel poverty, which of course focuses on England. Of course, there was in the budget last week a considerable amount of money assigned to the devolved administrations, including one of the biggest devolved settlements for the Scottish Government in many years, and I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will raise these issues with colleagues in the Scottish Parliament to get much-needed funding to these projects in Scotland as well. The other thing I think it's important to say on the devolution angle is that across this country we measure fuel poverty in very different ways as well. There are different metrics and targets for how we identify it. In Scotland, the metric for measuring fuel poverty is the same as is used in England to measure energy affordability, which includes if a household is fuel poor and if they have to spend a certain proportion of their income after housing costs, then they are deemed to be in fuel poverty, which is a slightly different figure to what's used in Scotland. However, I think many of the issues we've heard today are true across all parts of the UK, and I'll focus on many of those points today. And I think many honourable members have made this point, that the very idea that people should be in a situation where they have to choose between heating their home or feeding their family or other bills that they have to make is a stark choice for any family, and we shouldn't be in a position in a country as wealthy as ours where that is a choice that families have to make. And so I think I welcome the points from the Shadow Minister and from others that this is somewhere I think we can all work together to move forward on. But we do need to take more action than has been in the past 14 years. And that's why in our manifesto we were committed to slashing fuel poverty and to delivering our Warm Homes plan. And we've already taken the first steps in delivering that. In the budget last week, the Chancellor committed £1.8 billion to support fuel poverty schemes, helping over 225,000 households to reduce their energy bills by over £200. And we've announced that we'll consult this year on increasing the minimum energy standards in the domestic private rented sector, which comprises of 35% of all of those in fuel poverty in England are in the private rented sector. It's vital, of course, that we provide as much support as we can, and I want to pick up on a number of the points that honourable members have made during this debate. But the critical point that a number of people raised was trying to bring all of these different policies together into a cohesive fuel poverty strategy, and that's indeed what the government has committed to publishing in due course, in ensuring not only that we have a clear focus on tackling fuel poverty, but that the whole of government is aligned on delivering this. This is the approach that this new government has taken on a range of issues, in my department in particular on clean power by 2030, but on this issue as well, making sure all ministers, wherever they are, in whichever department and with whichever responsibility, come together to make this situation better. But I want to provide just a little bit of context, and I repeat the point that much of fuel poverty policy is devolved. In 2023, there were an estimated 13% of households, which is just over 3 million households in fuel poverty in England, under the metric that's used here, which is an effectively unchanged figure since 2022. And the Committee on Fuel Poverty, which advises on the effectiveness of policies and scrutinises these in England, stated that progress towards tackling fuel poverty has effectively stalled. In England, the target is to ensure that as many fuel-poor homes as possible achieve the minimum energy efficiency rating of Band C by 2030, but 46% of all low-income households in England were still living in a property with a fuel poverty efficiency rating of Band D or lower. So it shows just the sheer amount of work that we have to do on this issue. And therefore, we're working on a number of policies, and I reflect on the Honourable Lady's point in her speech that I accept that there is an urgency to moving forward on all of these issues. We have inherited quite a lot of issues that require urgent action, and I would ask for just a little patience, but I absolutely recognise the point that if you are living in fuel poverty, the impending winter is a crisis, and therefore the government is moving as quickly as possible on this issue. On the Warm Homes Plan, which we announced in our manifesto and which we are moving forward on, this is about transforming homes right across the country by making them cheaper and energy clean to run, rolling out upgrades from new insulation to solar and heat pumps. We'll partner with local authorities and combined authorities and the devolved governments where possible to roll out this plan. And this was in the speech in the budget last week, where we're announcing an initial £3.4 billion towards heat decarbonisation and household energy efficiency over the next 3 years. This includes £1.8 billion to support fuel poverty schemes, which will help, as I said, over 225,000 homes. If I turn to just a few of the contributions from honourable members in the debate, and the right honourable gentleman in his opening speech raised a number of points, which I'll come back to later in my speech, but one in particular on the radio teleswitch service, which he rightly notes and which will be a worry to many people, particularly in rural communities. He said that a roundtable was held, which was important, bringing together the key stakeholders. Ofgem have updated an action plan to make sure that we are pushing forward and in particular putting pressure on the energy companies who are responsible for delivering this to make sure that those upgrades are made, and there are targets in place, including in early next year, some really key milestones that they must meet. A number of honourable members mentioned the point around community benefits, and this is a debate that we've had in this chamber and across the House before. I think it's extremely important that if communities are hosting energy infrastructure, like in the right honourable gentleman's constituency with the Viking wind farm, which I visited not that long ago, that there should be some benefit to hosting that infrastructure. And certainly, what we don't want to see is communities hosting vital energy infrastructure actually being those most likely to be in fuel poverty. And so we are doing a lot of work at the moment to look at, indeed building on what the previous government consulted on around what community benefits might look like, and making sure that communities and individuals in communities get a genuine benefit from that, on the basis that some of the community benefits at the moment don't deliver quite the change that we would like. A number of members also raised the...
May I intervene?
Of course.
I wonder if the Energy Minister would allow humble servants like myself get involved in that, because I've spent several years working with Highland Council and other things on community benefits and would appreciate a meeting on that.
Well, I am always willing to take help from any honourable members, and indeed, if you could take some of this work off my plate, I'd be very happy to work with him on that. We will, of course, have to work out this question of where God comes from first. But I think if we can settle that it is self-evidently in the Central Belt in Rutherglen, then I'd be very happy to work with them. And that spoils the joke I was going to make about his comparison of temperatures with his wearing of his very woolly jumper this morning in London, which makes you wonder what he wears when he's in Skye. But anyway, that's for another debate, Sir Roger, I think. But genuinely, we want to have an open and collaborative approach on this. I think genuinely we want to make this work, and the consultation that the previous government carried out and the feedback we've got from a number of partners is that there are some really good examples out there of community benefits working well. There are obviously a lot of examples of it not working well, and I think if we can build on that together, I would very much appreciate doing that. The honourable gentleman, while we were with him, made the very good point as well, I think, about remembering the different types of fuel that different households are on, and the real issue, particularly for off-grid homes, which is a particular issue in the north of Scotland, but right across the UK, in fact, is important. And so I would just say, again, fuel poverty is devolved, so some of these questions are for the Scottish Government to answer. I know they will put them to them. But we are aware in England, for which the Department for Energy is responsible, that 12% of rural households are in fuel poverty, and those are the households with the largest fuel poverty gap. And so tackling that, the particular challenges in the rural context, are really important. And I think, I was just going to reference the honourable member from Strangford, and he wants to intervene, so I will take him.
Mr Chairman, I was very much listening to what the honourable gentleman was saying, and perhaps he's just about to tell us what's going to happen in Northern Ireland, where 62% of households are dependent upon oil, which, compared with England, it says very gracefully, Sir Roger, is only 4%. Therefore, the greater emphasis on Northern Ireland will be upon us. I know the Minister says it's a devolved matter. I know that money has been set aside by Labour to help, but the differential is massive, and it can't be ignored.
I think the gentleman, as always, makes a very good point, although I notice he called the Shadow Minister his friend and not myself. But I think over time we will build on that. I aspire to that. Quite right. But I think that he made a number of important points. And I have to confess, I think the statistic that he raised, it wasn't one that I was aware of, and I think really puts it into stark contrast, the difference in that. So I absolutely take that point. And I think he referenced in his earlier point about engaging with the Northern Irish Executive. I've met with both ministers that have responsibility for different parts of the energy policy. Most recently, in fact, in the interministerial working group across all the devolved nations, and one of the key topics we discussed was decarbonisation, particularly of households like that. So it's an issue we are absolutely taking forward. I'm conscious of time, Sir Roger, and so I just want to pick up on just a couple of final points that other honourable members have raised. The honourable gentleman for Wokingham tempted me to be drawn into Beveridge's Five Giants, and I think it actually is an important statement about where this government has come in, because it feels to me like want, disease, ignorance, squalor and idleness are yet again five giants that we have to tackle as a country, and we are dealing as quickly as we can with tackling all of them. I take the point that he makes, but it does, I think, bring into real stark contrast the fact that we have come in with some really tough decisions to make. There are pressing needs in the NHS, in the education system, in housing, in energy. We are doing what we can to improve all those. The budget last week was about fixing the foundations and investing in our public services again. There is undoubtedly more we can do, but we are moving forward as quickly as we can. I want to just touch on consumer protection, which a number of members have raised, and the point of the regulator. We have had a number of meetings, and the ministerial team in the department have had meetings with Ofgem over a variety of issues. But there's no doubt, and Ofgem shares this view, that suppliers could be doing much more to protect customers and to provide them with a better quality service. And so we are looking now, and there's a consultation underway around how we strengthen the regulator so that it can hold companies to account for wrongdoing, to require higher standards of performance, and to ensure that there is much better levels of compensation when those providers fail. And last year, Ofgem introduced much more stringent rules around the involuntary installation of prepayment meters, which I raised in Parliament as one of my first questions after I was elected, which was a shocking situation. But now there are much more stringent requirements in place, and we continue to monitor that to see if much more is required. So, to sum up, Sir Roger, can I just thank all honourable members for participating in this debate. I think there is agreement across all parties that this is an extremely important issue. Progress has stalled in recent years. We now need to make significant progress. But this government is committed to slashing fuel poverty. And we will do that by the fuel poverty strategy for England, but also across the whole of the UK, looking at what we can do with our energy system to reduce bills for everybody, to provide more secure energy for everyone, and to improve on home standards right across the UK. And we will do that by protecting low-income and vulnerable consumers, but also by trying to raise households out of poverty across the board. And that's why our strategy on child poverty, it's why raising the minimum wage, all of these factors combine to support those households that are struggling at the moment in fuel poverty. This is no doubt a topic we will return to again. We don't pretend to have all of the answers on this, and so we are open to any ideas from honourable members right across the House. Together, I think we can tackle this, but it needs concerted effort and investment, and this government has started. Thank you.
Alistair Carmichael to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Roger. I think this has been an exceptionally good debate. I've been encouraged by the degree of consensus that there has been. I think we have to approach a subject like this with humility and recognise, actually, that nobody has ever found the answer to these fairly intractable problems. I didn't anticipate that the main point of contention in the debate would be where God came from. God, of course, is, the theologians will tell you, omnipotent, omniscient and omnipresent. So all those who have claimed that he is from their constituency are able to do so quite accurately. A point, though, I think that is beyond any debate is that he is happiest, if not necessarily warmest, when he's in Orkney and Shetland.
Government policies on tackling fuel poverty. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Ayes have it. Order, order. 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 That's right. Members wishing to leave may do so. The next debate is not due technically to start until 4 o'clock, but I noticed that the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Moray West, Nairn and Strathspey is here. The Minister is here. If you wish to continue, if you wish to take a break, you may do so, but if you wish to continue, we can roll straight on. Are you content? In that case...